Good evening, interns and tutors, and welcome to our last intern and tutor feedback workshop for 2025. My name is Tabang Sorolela. I am a manager in the CPD and Registration Department of Pharmacy Council. So I just want to thank you for making time to attend tonight's workshop. There are a few remarks that I want to make before we start with the presentation. Firstly, I just want to apologize for starting late. There were a few glitches that we wanted to clear so that we can have a smooth workshop. And secondly, I just want also to request all participants to make sure that you mute yourself so that we don't have disturbances as we'll be continuing with our presentations. Today we're using a different platform, and then you are also having access to mute or unmute yourself, but we kindly requesting you to mute yourself so that we can have one person speaking at a time. And then I am with the assessors and moderators of Intern Portfolio of Evidence Entries. They are the ones who will be facilitating tonight's workshop, and they will introduce themselves as they come in. And I hope you will pay attention because these are the people who having a lot of assessment and moderation experience to share with you. And remember, the purpose of this workshop is just to help you to understand what is it that is required of you in order to be successful in all the portfolio of evidence entries that you are submitting. So I hope you will be able to listen and get all the information that you need. And then there are 3 facilitators, so each one has a part to present. And then at the end, we will have a question and answer session. So here you are also requested to submit your questions over the chat, and then someone from the office will read them loud for the assessors and other participants to hear, and the assessors will also be able to respond like that. And then there is also a link that will be shared towards the end of the presentation. The link is for the survey. So we're requesting all of you to complete the survey because it is also going to be used as a proof of attendance. Even if maybe you don't complete the other part, but just make sure that you provide your personal details so that we can mark you as present. And I think that's all from me. So, okay, the one last thing, we won't have a break in between the presenters because the presentation is not long. I think we can be able to focus until the last presentation. So there won't be any break, and we will just do allow the 3 presenters, and then at the 8 we'll just take the questions straightforward. And thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to our first presenter, and she will introduce herself. Thank you.
Good evening, colleagues, and welcome to this last workshop that we are presenting for Pharmacy Council. I'm Adele Nadia, and I will be taking you through the first part of the presentation. and hopefully for most of you for the last 5 months of your internship that is left, so that we can assist you to be successful to complete your internship before the end of the year. So if we look at the overview of tonight's presentation, we will be discussing why we are having this session. We will look at the structure of our presentation, and then we will discuss a little bit of generic issues that we regularly see with the submissions. There's common mistakes and omissions that we see on the portfolio of evidence system, the CPD system, and we will give you some guidance on how to do things a little bit better. And then we will also have a look at some problematic competency standards where we continuously see the same mistakes, and we'll also link that to the system, to the portfolio of evidence or the CPD system, and we will provide some guidance for you guys how to do things better in that regard. And we'll be talking about the way forward for you to complete your CPDs or your portfolio of evidence activities successfully, and then we'll have a question and answer session where you will be able to give all your questions. So first of all, why are we having this session? You are in the beginning of the year when we present this session, everything is quite new to you. You're new in the pharmacy. Some of you haven't worked on the CPD platform before, and now at this stage, you can now see the relevance. You have submitted your CPDs or your POEs. You're familiar with the format. You know the requirements. If we talk about a competency standard, you know what it is. And some of you, or most of you, hopefully have received some feedback from your assessor and moderators. So we can have a much deeper discussion now with you guys regarding some of the issues you might have, which we cannot have in the beginning of the year, because there we have a lot of content that we have to provide to you. So you will see this is a lot more application of the information we gave to you at the beginning of the year. So first of all, I just want to ask you, how are you feeling? So hopefully all of you are the happy bee that we are seeing on the screen, the one with the thumbs up, and you just have 1 or 2 questions. But I do think there's some of you that are confused. You don't know what to do. You are maybe a bit mad, or you want to cry. So hopefully tonight, after addressing the issues and discussing these issues, we can all be the happy bee, and you can complete your CPDs or your portfolio of evidence activities successfully. So moving on, you will see the presentation as a specific structure, and you will see the little B throughout our presentation, and the little B will link to a slide, and that slide will represent a slide in the Intern Tutor workshop that we presented earlier in the year in February and March. So if you have a look at that presentation together with this one, you will see cross-referencing between this presentation and that presentation. So you can just follow the B and look at the slide, and you can find that in the previous workshop. So you'll see the little B everywhere. So what we will do, the slide will have 2 sides. On the one side, we will state the mistakes, and we will describe the common errors, and the happy bee will be providing some guidelines and suggestions and what you should avoid and how you can fix the errors and the mistakes that we consistently and commonly see. There will also be some guidance for the tutors. So wherever you see that yellow block, that will be specifically some guidance for the tutors. And you can see this links to the previous presentation, slide 84 to slide 86, just to make the layout clear to you. So first of all, we're going to talk about mistakes and omissions. This is the generic issues which we continuously see throughout a lot of the presentations. So we're going to look at each of the steps within the CPD cycle, or the phases within the cycle, and make sure, first of all, an important thing that we see is interns, when they copy and paste information into Pharmacy Council's website, they sometimes copy the reflection into the planning section, they repeat the planning section, they copy the implementation into the evaluation, and they don't put in the correct information under the correct phase. And then you cannot assess the information because it doesn't match the criteria which we use to assess that specific phase of the CPD cycle. So first of all, if we look at the reflection and the title, so that's the first step. You remember you have a title. So the problem with the title, the common mistakes, is it's not related to the competency standard, or it's just a copy of the wording of the competency standard. It's not descriptive of the activity. It only addresses one behavioral statement. If you think about 5.3, for example, interns tend to make the title dispensing Schedule 6 medication. And that doesn't reflect all the behavioral statements of that competency standard. It only speaks to maybe one where we apply one of the legislative requirements, or the title is too long. So you can see that's the common mistakes. And how can you fix that? So first of all, make sure that your title reflects the competency standard. If you selected 3.5, for example, which is compounding, we would expect to find the word compounding somewhere in your title, but we would also want to see what are you compounding. So not only compounding, because that will be a copy of the competency standard or the wording, we'll see compounding a solution containing magnesium sulfate, or what the case may be. It's not maybe a good example, but we want to see what you are compounding. And as I said, we would expect to find the word compounding with what you are compounding in the title. And then keep it concise, not too long, and very descriptive. So ask yourself, once you've written your title, is it original? Is it descriptive? Does it describe my activity? And is it related to the competency standard? So for example, if you have 1.1, don't just have a title that says asthma. Give us a promotion of health and wellness or public health campaign. That should be in your title as well. So next step, we move on to the reflection. And if you look at the common mistakes, you can see on the white side, the incorrect CS was chosen. So your reflection, you selected 3.5, but you've given a description for 3.4, or what the case may be. There's no justification why you selected this activity. So there was no trigger, there was no incident, nothing happened to trigger this learning need. Remember, something happens in the pharmacy that made you realize that this was a learning need, and we often see the learning trigger is lacking, or the authenticity of the learning trigger. At this stage of the year, you will get a submission where the intern said, I have never dispensed a Schedule 6 prescription before. And you sometimes wonder what the intern have been doing up to now. It's almost July, or it is July, the end of July. And then you question this learning trigger. Did this really happen? Did the intern really have to learn this? So make sure that the authenticity of the learning trigger, that you provide that to us. And then another problem with reflection, the focus is on the theory or the subject matter of the CPD, or the content of the recipient activity. For example, if we think about providing education and training, the interns will focus on the patient did not know how to use the inhaler, or the patient did not know how to use an insulin pen. But the learning need in actual fact was you needed to learn how to provide counseling to a patient, or you needed to learn how to do training or do a public health campaign. So it's not the learning need of the patient or the audience, but your own learning need. And then, for example, I've spoken about 5.3. A lot of the times in the title and the reflection, interns only talk about a Schedule 6 prescription. They received a Schedule 6 prescription and they were not sure what are the ethical guidelines for dispensing a Schedule 6 prescription, and they forget about all the other behavioral statements. And the actual learning need for 5.3 is learning to practice ethically and legally in your daily practice, not only dispensing Schedule 6 medicine. So please don't lose focus about the outcome of what you want to learn, and that should reflect all the behavioral statements and not only one. Another problem, no mention of the intended application of the new learning need. So what you need to learn, and what do you hope to achieve after you've met your learning need. Remember, that should also be included in your reflection. So now you can see on the blue side, how can you fix these errors? And it's very easy. Make sure that you've chosen the correct competency standard for your learning need. Clearly describe what happened that made you realize that you needed to learn this, and then focus on the competency standard and the behavioral statements, and clearly state your learning need in terms of the skill that you need to learn. Not the patient, not the knowledge that the patient requires, but the skill you are learning. For example, to practice ethically or legally, to do compounding, to host a public health campaign. Remember, the competency standard is the skill that you want to learn, and that has to come out clearly. And if you look at the little B on top, it reflects slide 15 and 16 in the presentation that was given at the beginning of the year. So overall, the reflection was done fairly well, but make sure that you address all of these to be fully, that you have the reflection fully met. So what do I need to know, and what do I need to be able to do after I've met my learning need? So when we move on from the reflection, we go to the planning. So that's the second phase. And the planning, you can read what the big problems is, or the common mistakes. The planning is not linked to the behavioral statements, or it's not based on the behavioral statement. The planning is written in the present. Remember, you're planning what you plan to do. How will you achieve this skill? You have to describe the skill you've identified in the reflection, how you plan to address that skill that you want to learn. Don't only provide the resources. Remember, you have to give us the resource, the section within the resource that you plan to use, and why you chose that resource. So, for example, you will state, I will consult the GPP, section 2.1.8, because that is where the minimum standards for compounding can be found. Or I will consult the compounding SOP, because that is my pharmacy's minimum standard for compounding, and we link that to the specific behavioral statement. So you can clearly see it must be what you will be doing. It says in future tense. You name the resource, you name the section within the resource, and why you selected the resources. And remember to think about how you're going to gain this skill. That should also be included in the planning. So very important, please use your behavioral statements to guide your planning, because if you only plan, for example, in 5.3 to dispense a Schedule 6 prescription, you will not be addressing the code of conduct or the professional indemnity insurance or keeping abreast of legislation. So use the behavioral statements as a guide to plan the planning section, because remember, that is what you have to give evidence for. And that also has to be included in the implementation phase. So add the chapters and the sections and the page numbers where appropriate. It should be written in the future tense. And planning is not only what you are going to do, but why. Remember the rationale for why did you choose the SOP? Why did you select the Pharmacy Act? Why did you select the SAMF, or what the case may be, whatever the resource is that you have identified. If we continue with your planning, planning is too general, it's superficial, or it's insufficient. There's a struggle. You can't differentiate between the planning and the implementation, so it's sometimes a duplication, and the planning is not talking to the implementation. And remember, as I said, if you mention a document in your planning, we expect to find that document mentioned in the implementation, and we expect to find that document in the evidence. And I keep going back to 5.3 because that is sometimes problematic. An intern will talk about dispensing a Schedule 6 prescription, and when you get to the evidence, there suddenly pops up a professional indemnity certificate, and they haven't mentioned it at all previously in the planning or in the implementation. So you can see how to fix that. Your planning should be descriptive of the activity and not a general statement of how this can be addressed. So we want specific information, what you are going to do to learn the new skill and to address each behavioral statement. So make sure, is it in future tense? Have you given the reasoning, specific details, and linking to at least 75% of the behavioral statements? So remember, include the behavioral statement link in the planning, so you can already see that you've addressed all of them. So implementation, what's the problem there? The implementation is not supported by the evidence. Remember, it's a story. You tell us what you're going to do. In the implementation, you told us what you did, and then we want to see that these three talk to one another. So if you want to address a behavioral statement and it talks about, for example, professional indemnity, we want to see that you consulted the GPP, found the requirements, you have professional indemnity, here's my certificate, here's the GPP, here it's linked to the behavioral statement. So the text says that what was done, but no evidence to support this. So everything you say you did, you must provide proof. Evidence provided with no description. And please, this is very important. Please do not scan in pages and pages of the GPP with only a little arrow or a star, and nobody knows what it means or why it's there or which part of this have you used, or a professional information document. We have this professional information document, but no indication. Did you use the side effects? Did you use the dosage to see if the dosage is correct? Did you look at the schedule? So indicate how you used this document, to work with the document to show us what you did. So no link to the evidence in the implementation. So please link that. No linking to the behavioral statements. For example, I had applied a SOP and we don't see the SOP, or there's an unannotated SOP in the evidence. And it's easy to fix. Provide evidence for all the resources mentioned in the planning and implementation and make sure they match. Include links to the evidence in the implementation. Include links to the behavioral statements. And remember, just a copy of a SOP or the GPP or an act doesn't prove that you can apply it. So we want to see, here's the information and here's my application. Here's the minimum standards for cold chain management, and here I am doing cold chain management. So we clearly have to see the skill within the evidence. So it's very important. The completion date must be the date after the completion of the activity. So if you counsel the patient, it's after the activity has been completed. So again, ask yourself what, where, when, how, and reference to the evidence and linked to at least 75% of the behavioral statements. And that is very important. So you can see again, the little B talks to slide 32 in the previous presentation. And now we talk about the evidence. The evidence is very, very important. Don't put in blanket evidence. So there we are talking for a complete competency standard or for more than one behavioral statement. So an intern will, for example, put a page of the GPP in and they will say, this is for behavioral statement A, B, C, and D. Please do not do that. Be specific. There's not sufficient evidence to cover at least 75% of the behavioral statements, or you are using the same evidence in more than one submission. So please, there's a lot of things happening in the pharmacy, so do a new activity for each entry that you make. And patient confidentiality, that is very, very, very important on the evidence. We see a lot of patient faces, audience faces in public health campaigns. We see names, signatures, telephone numbers, patient addresses. So please make sure, because if that is visible, the activity is automatically not yet successful. So please consider each behavioral statement as a standalone activity. So one piece of evidence will not fit all 5 behavioral statements. So please make sure that you provide sufficient evidence for each behavioral statement individually. It might be related to more than one behavioral statement, but most of the time you will need additional evidence to completely address each behavioral statement. So how to fix this? Provide evidence for each separate behavioral statement and make sure that you show sufficient skill, not only for example, a page of the GPP, show how you applied the information, and be on the cautious side. Rather add more pieces of evidence, but please relevant evidence, not just evidence for the sake of adding evidence, because you can still have requirement met if one piece of evidence is rejected. For example, if there are 5 behavioral statements and you select or submit evidence for 5, but the assessor or moderator doesn't agree that you haven't addressed one behavioral statement sufficiently, you have still addressed 4 others, which means you have addressed 80%. So please be on the cautious side and rather try and address all the behavioral statements. So as we said, 75% must be provided. So if there are 4 more behavioral statements in the competency standard, you can see there, if there are 4, you have to give for 3. If there are 9 behavioral statements, there should be evidence for 7. And as we said, try and submit for 9. So if the assessor doesn't agree with you or don't agree with you for one of the behavioral statements, you still have 8 out of 9, which will be sufficient then. Evidence annotation errors, and this is really a big problem, the annotation of evidence, providing relevance to the evidence. So the problem is the annotations is insufficient, or there's no annotation. It's very messy and unclear. You don't know where it is. It's ambiguous labeling. The annotation is on the top of the page and it just says A, B, C, and D. Please avoid that. It must be annotated as relevant to a specific behavioral statement and not all of them. So we talk about blanket annotation as well. So we will see on the top of a poster, for example, this addresses behavioral statement A, B, and C. You have to show us where on that poster is A, where on that poster is B. So you need to be specific. And as I said, linkage to the behavioral statement, I just spoke about that. If your public health campaign poster has disease prevention on there, I want to see which section of the poster links to disease prevention. No highlights to which part of the uploaded evidence is relevant. I had an intern one time that submitted the whole Pharmacy Act, I think I don't know how many pages, with no annotation. So it was unclear why anything was included in this evidence. And it's very important to show us why haven't you included this page? Why is it relevant? Why was this needed to improve your skill? So ensure that you show application of the evidence. So if you think about competency standard 4.6, you will provide the SOP, but then you have to show us how you applied the SOP. You have the policy, but how did you gain the skill by applying the policy? And that's very important, to show the application. So the fixes, make sure that each piece of evidence is linked to a specific behavioral statement. Ensure that your annotation is detailed and neat, even if it's handwritten, that's fine, but make sure it's neat. Show how the evidence meets the requirements of the behavioral statement, so explain it to the assessor. As I said, avoid using A, B, and C at the top of the page and not specifically link each behavioral statement. So clearly show which part of the uploaded evidence is required, either by underlining or a line next to it, but clearly show us what you used on that page. And please, again, pay attention to patient confidentiality and look at attendance registers for patient confidentiality as well. Still talking about evidence. The evidence is inappropriate. On the left-hand side, you can see long and unannotated parts of reference material, invalid evidence. The evidence is not authentic, it's blurry, it's uploaded incorrectly, or you have uploaded CS 5.3's evidence in 2.2. So please make sure that you upload the correct document. The evidence is all over the place. For explaining it in plain language, remember, once your assessor opens the document, you think logically about the behavioral statements that is following. And sometimes it's so confusing because here you have on page 1, you have a professional indemnity certificate, and on page 16 is the GPP that states you should have your own professional indemnity cover, and then you have the requirements regulation 33 on page 2 of what the requirements for prescription, but the prescription is only on page 24. So there's no linking and it's all over the place, and you have to remember where you've seen that and to what this links. So make sure that your evidence is nice and chronologically placed and ordered, and if possible according to the behavioral statements, because that's the story that you want to tell. Please do not submit in multiple documents, because the storyline also really gets lost if you have 6 or 7 documents and you don't know where what fits. There's no annotation. You don't know which behavioral statement is being addressed. So please make sure that you have a well-organized evidence document for us to follow. So how to fix this? Most important, to annotate and link to the behavioral statements. Ensure that the evidence is valid and it's relevant to the competency standard. It's accurate, it's logical, and there are no calculation errors or any factual errors, because then the evidence will not be accepted. Make sure that the evidence is authentic and it's not made up. It's very easy to spot something that you can see was clearly manufactured and it did not happen. So make sure that your evidence is legible, it's not uploaded upside down, and it's arranged in a logical manner. And as I say, maybe use the behavioral statements to just structure the logical order of the evidence, and please submit it in one document. So still on evaluation, we're on the evaluation incomplete entries, and you'll see the little B looks at slide 26 to 28. And very important here, you have to include 4 different aspects. So first of all, how have I applied this new competency or this new skill that I have learned? And a lot of interns struggle with the evaluation because, say for example, you held a public health campaign. And now you say, I've learned about asthma inhalers, and now I want to learn about diabetic pens. Your learning need was how to do a public health campaign or how to promote health and wellness. So that is the competency or the skill that we want to know how you applied it. So how has it impacted my practice, the new skill that you have learned? What have you learned? And to give us a specific example of how you used that skill. So say, for example, you compounded a mixture, you compounded a cream, and a few days later you got a prescription for a completely different mixture. So that's another place where interns struggle. So today they made a caffeine syrup, and they'll say the next day I did a caffeine syrup again and I was able to do it by myself. So it's the same activity, but we want to know how you applied the compounding skill that you learned in a new situation. So not the same one again. So it's different from the implementation scenario. So that's the first thing. And then we also ask, you can see it's different from the implementation. It occurred after the implementation. And please do not say, I was able to do it again. What were you able to do again? And give us a specific example. So the points under evaluation should not refer only to the activity that was undertaken. For example, the caffeine syrup, it was the compounding that the skill that you were learning, and it must be relevant to the competency standard and its behavioral statements. So if we continue with the evaluation, I just want to add something there. The future learning need, we spoke about that earlier today. Your future learning need. Say, for example, you learned how to compound the caffeine. And now you say, I want to learn how to compound shell solution. Remember, the skill you gained was compounding. You have gained that skill. What is the new skill that you want to learn? Another example is you provided training to colleagues on hypertension, and now you say, I want to provide training again on diabetes. So that's not a future learning need. You are able to provide education and training. What's a new skill you want to learn? So the last thing I want to talk about is writing skill, or there's one more slide. Poor and no proofreading. So please, you guys, check what you've written. Maybe do your CPD in Word, do a spell check, and then just copy into Pharmacy Council's website. Inappropriate language, incomplete sentences, and your writing that's not professional. So ensure that it's professional. So a good way to do that is maybe do it in Word, do a proper spell check, and then just copy it into Pharmacy Council's website. So the last slide from me will be breach of confidentiality, and this is non-negotiable. If you have breached patient confidentiality, your submission will automatically be not yet competent. So however good your submission was, whatever you submitted, if patient confidentiality is breached, you will not be successful. So please make sure photographs, patient faces, signatures, patient addresses, telephone numbers, any way that we can find a patient should be obscured. And please, please, please make sure of that. That is very important. And a lot of interns fail due to patient confidentiality breach. So thank you, you guys. I'm giving over to Dr. Hubert, and she will continue with the next few slides.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. So I'm gonna talk about. So I'm Dr. Yanda Hubert. I'm a moderator of POEs for interns, and I'm gonna talk to you about the resubmissions. Now, often we see that entries get resubmitted without any changes. Remember that your submission will go back to the same assessor. It's not that you will get a new assessor and that person might think differently or see things differently than you have done. It's the same assessor for all your entries that you've made. So here we want to urge the tutors as well to check that the entry has been improved before you verify or validate that resubmission and send it for assessment. So how can you fix this? Never ignore the assessor comments. So look what they wrote there. I always say if you have been successful, then probably there will be some comments as well. So don't ignore the successful ones. Open that document and look what the assessor or the moderator wrote there. Perhaps you were successful, but there were some issues regarding your planning or your implementation or your reflection that you can fix for future submissions. And again, don't think that we will ignore the issues that we had in the first round. So really address the comments. And then you need to decide if a not yet successful or not yet competent entry needs amendment or whether you should rather replace it. And often if it is something like counselling, we say that we could not see the interaction with the patient, or then that cannot be fixed. You need to start over with a new activity. The same if you have, for example, included a wrong batch due expiry date on a product that you've compounded. You cannot fix that because that product has been dispensed and it's been given to the patient, and now you can't go back and fix that. You will have to start over with it. If it was just something like breach of patient confidentiality, and that was the only thing, and you can fix that, then it's fixable. Then you can resubmit by just fixing that. So remember that each submission or resubmission is assessed as a new complete standalone entry. So don't just add documents. if I moderate and it's a resubmission and I see there was evidence uploaded, say for example in March, and now I moderate and there's evidence uploaded in July or August, I'm only going to look at the last evidence that was uploaded. So rather upload everything from scratch. So don't think that you can just add. We see it as a new activity. And important to change the date of completion, that you have completed the activity or the achievement date, to the new date. Often we see that an intern have an achievement date in March, but now the documents are uploaded later. So or the prescription that is now included is after you have indicated your achievement date. So you can't say I achieved this on the 23rd of March, but the prescription that I use in my evidence is dated the 1st of July. Then obviously you have not achieved it by the 23rd of March. So make sure about the date of completion and the achievement date, and that it corresponds. What we also see is entries submitted with incorrect or unacceptable changes. That's why we said you need to look at the comments. So you can fix that by not falsifying or creating evidence. For example, the comment was that there's no attendance register or there's no batch manufacturing document for the specific product that you compounded, and now suddenly for the resubmission, now you have an attendance register. It was the same topic, the same date, but now suddenly here appears magically an attendance register or a batch manufacturing sheet or a patient history. So then we can know that this was not done, and then we will mark you as not yet successful again, because then you have falsified or you have created evidence. So it is important that you are clear about what is required of you when your entry requires resubmission, and therefore you will have to look at the comments that was made by the assessors and all the moderators. Again, that little B refers you to the slides of the training workshop, where you can also go and look at the information that we provided then if you should resubmit your activity. Now we are going to focus on some problematic competency standards. And here it's important that you read the complete competency standard entry before you try to address that. Meaning reading not only the title of the competency standard, but also all the behavioral statements. So read through everything before you start. And then also, if you look in the beginning of the year's presentation, slide 69 and onwards, there we talked about the recommendations that we made. Some of the competency standards we say are recommended, meaning you should actually rather do those. Some is possible, so you might be able to do certain of them. If you're working in manufacturing, there are certain competency standards that you will be able to do. If you're in academia, if you're an academic intern, then there's certain competency standards that you would be able to do. For example, 6.3, challenging, you should rather avoid to select those. For example, if you are an intern working in a community pharmacy, a retail pharmacy, then you should not select, for example, 3.1, which has to do with line clearances and manufacturing in the sense of the industry. Or if you're in an institutional or a community pharmacy, then you should not select 6.3, which pertains to training and education to students and participate in an approved program for training. Then you would rather do 6.2. It's also important to consider the separate behavioral statements, especially for 5.3. Also 3.4, you don't need to have one prescription to address all 9 or 10 of the behavioral statements under 3.4. You can have more than one prescription. When you do the policy and the SOP, you can have an SOP and you can show us how you apply a different policy. It doesn't need to be, if your SOP is on procurement, then your policy should also be about procurement. We want to see, can you apply a policy and can you apply SOPs? And then ask yourself before you start, can I provide evidence, sufficient evidence for sufficient behavioral statements? And if you cannot, say for example, you want to do a recall of medicines, I think it's 3.6. You cannot, if you don't have an actual recall, you cannot do 3.6 because there's only 3 behavioral statements. And if you only cover 2 of them, then you will not be successful because your evidence will not be sufficient. You cannot say, if a recall occurs, this is what I will do. Then it is not, it should not be theoretical. You should actually do a medicine recall or show us how you have handled that. So make sure that you can provide sufficient evidence. Now we're going to look into the different domains and what we see there. So domain 1 focuses on public health. And this implies activities that will benefit a larger community audience. So I know that in the description it says healthcare professionals and the public, but specifically if you do 1.1, then you want to focus, it should be the public, the larger public. So if you do a health campaign, it should not be for personnel in the hospital or in the pharmacy. You can include the cleaners and the porters, etc. But it should focus on the community at large. And also remember to think clearly about what constitutes health promotion and what constitutes primary health care. And make sure that you know what does a public health campaign entails. So just standing in front of an audience for half an hour and giving them information on a specific condition or disease, that is not a campaign. If you go and look at what is a campaign. So make sure that you know that you have an understanding of the terminology. So some concepts is often confusing and you don't understand them clearly. So if we look at a health campaign, it usually follows the steps of identify the health need, then you prepare the intervention, then you deliver the intervention to the target audience, and then you assess the intervention's effectiveness. So it should be more than just I'm standing and I'm giving with a poster and now I'm giving information. Did those people understood the information? Was it relevant to them? You can't, it's not, it doesn't make sense if your topic for health promotion, for example, is female health or female reproduction, and then the audience that you have are predominantly males and older people. Then you have a convenient audience, and that information might not be relevant to them. So make sure that your audience is the topic is relevant to the audience that you address. If you do something like a flu shot campaign, I mean, that is relevant to almost everybody, so that won't matter that much. But make sure about, you can't focus on diabetes, but it's asthma day or hypertension clinic or HIV clinic. So make sure about your audience and the topic that you want to address, and the effectiveness of the intervention that you provided or delivered. So in domain 1, Most interns submit 1.1, which is the promotion of health and wellness. And again, the common mistakes or errors that we see is that the audience or of individual patients or colleagues are described. So you will see one-on-ones with patients. That is not a public campaign, or as I've just said, a randomly chosen target audience that is not relevant to the health message, or group work submitted and that you have not mentioned the skill that you have learned. Remember, it's about the skill you want to show us. So how can you fix this? Don't forget that domain 1 is about public health. You need to show us how you have interacted with the target audience, and you need to describe how you have developed the materials to meet the health promotion requirements and how the materials are relevant to the health message that you have portrayed. It's important to include sufficient activities to constitute the health campaign and link it to the behavioral statements. And here we will often see a poster, as Mrs. Nordia also said, and then on the post at the top, you will annotate that this links to A, B, C, and D. So how does a poster link to D? Which part on the poster show us here you have provided advice on health promotion? Which part shows provision of advice on disease prevention and control and healthy lifestyles, etc.? So remember, we want to see, you must show us how you have provided the advice. So we want to see that interaction with the audience as well. And only submit your own contribution to the activity. If it was a wellness day and all the interns participated, then we want to clearly see what you did. What was your role? How did you provide advice on health promotion, on disease prevention, on healthy lifestyles, etc.? So make sure that your role is very clear in this activity. Okay, if we move on to domain 2, then we're going to look firstly at competence standard 2.2, which is patient counselling. And the common mistakes that we find is that there's no evidence of communication with the patients. That is not provided. And that the focus is only on the medicine. So we will see a lot of information regarding the treatment and the medicine and the different medicines, but we don't see the communication with the patients. And a lot of interns include unverified dialogue as evidence. And then, I mean, if you type out a dialogue, I can do it at night in my home when I can't sleep. I can fabricate a dialogue between myself and a patient to fit a certain prescription, etc. So refrain from using a dialogue unless you can have someone to verify. I mean, if you design a patient counseling sheet for yourself that you fill in or complete as you are going along with the counseling process, and you can have your tutor or the RP or someone verify that this counseling happened, then it's fine. Also, interns will include articles on active and reflective listening or product information leaflets, and then it's not linked to a behavioral statement, and that active and reflective listening, it's not linked to how did I actually do it. And often many pieces of evidence, and you don't link it to the behavioral statements, and many behavioral statements or behavioral statement requirements are not met. That is what's most often is the case with 2.2, that the evidence is not sufficient. I have once seen an activity for 2.2 where it was a photograph of the intern facing the patient, and the annotation is, here I am listening actively, but the intern is just standing there. So it's very difficult. I know providing evidence for reflective listening can be, or effective listening and the reflective listening techniques, that can be difficult to do, but this is where you need someone that can verify that you have did this and that you have asked the correct questions and that you have summarized what the patient told you. So you can fix this by first to establish the patient's understanding. You can ask him or her certain questions. Again, make yourself a counseling sheet where you can write down what the patient, the answers or the responses were. You need to include patient feedback, which should be dated and signed to verify that the counseling took place. So you can compile a patient feedback survey or questionnaire that you ask the patient just to complete that and sign it. Just remember about patient confidentiality. You can take notes or the notes that you took during your counseling session. What did you ask the patient and what did you tell the patient to do? A patient-specific counseling plan. You should also focus on interaction with the patient, actually with the actual counseling and not just the medicine. Here is the uh, product information leaflet that I use to show how to use an inhaler or how to use a insulin pen. Remember that uploaded photo does not prove that the counseling took place. Make sure that you have covered sufficient behavioral statements and show with evidence how you have that you include active and reflective listening techniques. So it is important to show application of the skills that you have submitted as evidence and not just the product, but the skill that you want to show us. So although patient counseling is a recommended competency standard, it can also be I don't want to use the word difficult because it's really doable, but it takes a lot of planning and you need to plan your patient counseling activity really well. This is just an example that I want to show you on what to consider when, for example, in this case, you counsel a patient on an insulin pen and to align it to the behavioral statement in competency standard 2.2. So you can see the yellow speech bubbles in the top right corner. You will see that it is the intern-centered focus. So it is, for example, an insulin pen or an asthma pump, and it is usually driven by the intern's learning need, but the patient is 10 plus years on insulin, and it often ignores the counseling skill development. So make sure that it is patient-centered counseling. So you need to make use of verbal and non-verbal communication. You need to show active and reflective listening. You should tailor a plan to the patient's need, and you should build the patient's understanding and encourages shared decision making. So the ideal approach would to have a balance between the clinical and the communication goals. So the clinical goals that you have, you should practice counseling with newer patients and match the task that you have to the patient's needs. So you need to understand what does the patient want to know about this disease or this medication, and I need to counsel this patient. So you must focus on the patient and not on and the counseling and not your I want to do patient counseling, so this is my need, and then you get lost in this is not a new patient. This patient know how to use the medication, and often the consequences that we have is that the patient feels unheard or dismanaged, and you have missed an opportunity to build rapport with the patient. So that is also important, that you need to build that trust with the patient, and the intern miss the professional skill that they want to show us. So don't focus on the product, focus on the skill, on the communication, and focus it on make sure that it is patient-centered counseling that takes place and not intern focused. The other competency standard that is often selected from domain 2 is 2.6, which is pharmacist-initiated therapy. And often what we see here, the problems that we encountered is that there's not a patient history taken or fully reported. Again, the dialogue submitted as evidence that the entry was built around an item on a prescription. Remember, if it is a prescription, then it is no longer pharmacist-initiated, then it's doctor-initiated. And if you address or submit behavioral statement D, which is referring patients when required to an appropriate healthcare provider or resource, then there's no evidence to substantiate this or that this is submitted. So you will say in the implementation, in your description, you will say, I've referred the patient, or I told the patient that if they're not better in 10 days, they must contact their prescriber. But in your evidence, there's no evidence for that. And again, the focus is often on information gathering on the condition and the treatment, and not on sharing this with the patient. So you will see, if you look at the behavioral statements, you need to assess and treat a patient based on objective and subjective signs and symptoms as guided by relevant legislation and within your scope of practice. And then B, discuss the use of appropriate medicines and obtaining consensus from the patient, taking into account patient preferences, allergies, and medical history. Often we don't see that anywhere in the evidence that you have in some way wanted to find out what is the patient's preference. Does this patient prefer an effervescent tablet for flu, or does this patient refer a capsule, or does this patient rather refer a syrup like Benylin for flu? So what is the preference of the patient? It can also be a financial preference. The patient wants the cheapest possible treatment, but because he doesn't have enough money, or he doesn't have a medical aid, etc., or he's allergic to something, or the ladies, if it's a female patient, she might be pregnant or breastfeeding, and then that should also be taken into account. And then documenting the intervention, including the medicine supply according to current legislative requirements. So often interns will include the blue copy or the printout, and they will say, yeah, I have documented it, or they will provide screenshots of the patient's profile to show that they have documented it. But according to the current legislative requirements part is and really included to show us what is the legislative requirements and how did you adhere to that. And then referring the patients is also often not included in the evidence. So here it is important that you make yourself a patient assessment sheet where you can write down while you are busy with the patient, not afterwards typing it out. Write it down while you are busy with the patient to fill that in, and then you can cover a lot of the aspects. So remember also, if a patient comes into the pharmacy and asks you for, say for example, for accurate tablets, and that is not pharmacist-initiated therapy. That's a request from the patient. So the patient came in and they complained about a headache or body pain or stomach cramps, etc. So how can you fix this? You can go beyond merely saying that the patient history was taken. You need to provide the patient the responses, and you need to include in the discussion how your evaluation of the history assisted in the choice of the treatment. If you submit a dialogue, again, it must be verified, and then it must not be a typed out dialogue. It must be notes that you take while you are busy with this patient. Remember that the pharmacist-initiated therapy is guided by the patient's subjective and objective signs and symptoms. That's what I refer to when I said if the patient requests a specific product, then it is not really pharmacist-initiated therapy. And if you do referral, you can, for example, submit a referral letter that must be verified. So you can say in the pharmacy, we have this form or this little letter that we use to complete, to refer the patient to the doctor, where we put on the date of the initial interaction with the patient and the initial symptoms and signs that they reported, and this is how I treated the patient. Often interns will also include for the history the screenshots from the dispensing program, but now this is a new patient and there's no medication history, but you say here you have checked the history, and then obviously that is not really valid to do. So make sure that you have a good patient history. Okay, if we move on to domain 3, 3.4 medicine dispensing, it's also a popular competency standard that is submitted, but we often see insufficient evidence for 75% or 7 of the behavioral statements. Often only behavioral statement A, the evaluating, interpreting, and preparing the prescription, is covered, and most often E and F, preparing the extemporaneous preparation and performing pharmaceutical calculations, is not covered. We often see outdated or incorrect reference used for validating the prescription. Remember the legislation that you need to use is section 33. If you want to make use of a SAMF, don't use an old one, use the latest one, but rather use legislation to validate the prescription. Then we often see antibiotic reconstitution submitted as compounding. Remember, it is not compounding. If you add water to a powder, it is not compounding, it is reconstitution. Then interns calculate the number of doses to dispense or number of tablets to dispense. That is also not pharmaceutical calculations. And then references regarding to dosages and appropriateness of medication are not submitted. So if you look at behavioral statement C, it indicates that you need to perform a therapeutic review of a prescription to ensure the pharmaceutical and clinical appropriateness of the treatment. So how did you do that? Often that is not included as evidence. So you can fix this easily. It is very important to consider the behavioral statement requirements as standalone activities. You need to make sure that you use the latest up-to-date references and resources. And if you include extemporaneous compounding, you need to make sure that the expiry date is correct. And your references that you submit needs to be annotated. You need to submit the references, and you need to annotate as well. And then 3.5, medicine and compounding. Often interns think that this is easy, an easy competency standard, because there's only one behavioral statement, and then they ignore the requirement to apply pharmaceutical knowledge. And often we see a missing expiry date or an incorrect expiry date on the product. The steps that you must follow to compound is missing. The calculations are incorrect, and if calculations are incorrect, then the whole activity is not valid and will then not be, you will then not be successful. And you do not include compounding guidelines, for example, the GPP or the SOP that you have used. And the interns did not or do not give their formulations the correct expiry date as required by Regulation 3 of the Medicines Act, published in August 2017. And often interns do not know the difference between a 1 in 4 dilution and a 1-to-4 dilution. So make sure that it is that you know when is it 1 in 4 and when is it a 1-to-4 dilution. So it's definitely not true that 3.5 is an easy competency standard to do. You need annotated reference material, including your SOP, a batch manufacturing record, because you need to show us how you can maintain batch traceability. And your evidence must prove your actions. So you need to follow Regulation 3 of Act 101 of 1965 for the expiry date, which states that extemporaneous compound or extemporaneously compounded product should only have an expiry date of no longer than 30 days. But if your institution uses longer expiry dates, then you should comment on how this does not fulfill the regulation, or you should provide us with the stability testing that was performed in your facility to ensure that the product will be still stable after 30 days. You need to ensure that all the steps of the compounding process are followed, and that you're following pharmaceutical principles. Your calculations must be checked carefully before submitting. You need to include compounding guidelines, and you need to annotate that. And very important, Regulation 10, which refers to labeling. For example, a lot of interns submit or do make a magic mouthwash. And then your label does not comply with legislation, because it states there that all the ingredients must be stated on the label. So you can't just put the magic mouthwash. You need to include the names of the different components of that mixture. And you should also verify, or can use the British Pharmacopoeia or the Codex to verify the processes that you have followed. So you see, there's a lot of documents and resources that you need to add and need to include when you do 3.5. It's not a difficult one, but it's not easy because there's one behavioral statement. But again, if you plan correctly and you have sufficient references and resources, and your calculations are correct, and your annotations are clear, and you can link the steps. Remember, we need to see the final product. We need to see you do the compounding. If it's stated that the responsible pharmacist should sign off each step, then we need to see that signature, and you need to annotate that this is his signature, and yeah, they signed off on this step. Okay, on this note, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Mr. Mulatetsi Makadu, and he will take you through to the last slides before we get to the question and answer section. Thank you, Mr. Makadu. Over to you.
And good evening, colleagues and interns. My name is Mulatezi Makada. I'm an assessor for the CPD. So I will be taking you through the last part of the presentations, starting with or continuing with 4.6, which is SOPs and policies. We are referring you to page number 40. I think on the slide is 39. For this year, it is on page number 40 of the Intern manual, where you need to find a definition of policies, since we always encounter challenges where interns do not know how to differentiate between a policy and then SOP, hence the reason why it is included in the Intern Tutor manual, and that information is available on page number 40. Right, domain 4.6 is the most common one. I mean, yes, 4.6 the most common one that interns take under domain 4. So here, the CS is more of a policy development, which mean that interns need to show clearly how they have applied the SOP the SOP, which should be linked to a specific points of the SOP that they may have attached. And they also need to clearly indicate how they have applied a policy. So those are the only two BS that are for 6. What we need to remind you as interns is that SOPs and policies are not the same thing. Hence, maybe that is why we wanted you to know more about them. When you apply the SOP, let's say, for example, you are applying the SOP for receiving medicines. So make sure that you apply the complete SOP, and then make sure that whatever you are writing is linking to the PS, and also the evidence that you submit should definitely talk to what you were applying. Normally, interns use the GPP, the Pharmacy Act, the Medicine Act, and the GWP as part of satisfying the BSA for applying policy. So all those things are not policy. So that is why you will find that your CPD under 4.6 will not be successful if you, instead of applying a policy, then you use the GPP and the other and the X as a policy. Then we'll move on to 5.3. This one is mandatory CPD for all of you, but there are also common mistakes or errors that we need to highlight to you. Like the first one, maybe that we can talk about, is that on the limited focus on dispensing Schedule 6 prescriptions, where the focus is only considering dispensing the Schedule 6 prescriptions. And then the other common error is quoting the legislations which are outdated, more in particular to satisfy BS number B, which is about the scope of practice of an intern. So quite often we see interns quoting the legislation which is outdated. So this is just to remind you that you need to thoroughly or check on the website, then you'll see the latest copy. This is what you need to be quoting rather than referring to the old one, because if you do that, although you may have written everything showed us the copy maybe from the GPP on the scope of practice of the intern, the fact that it has been now updated, showing us that kind of information which is outdated, automatically does not mean, automatically it means that on that particular BS you have not yet fulfilled the requirements. So BSB won't be met in that particular instance. The other thing that you need to also maybe take note of is the failure to provide proper professional indemnity insurance. When we say indemnity insurance to satisfy BS number D, we are not referring to the applications that you have submitted for indemnity insurance, and then interns normally ignore that part of professional indemnity requirements. So we will give you guidance on what is needed, maybe on the right when I get to the right site. And then lastly, the interns also focusing only on legal compliance, ignoring the ethical consideration, as my colleagues have already indicated. Focusing only on legal and not ethical aspects of practice. And then again, where the SOPs are considered as legislation, which is not really the case. And then how do you correct that? You need to cover more activities because Schedule 6 prescription cannot provide evidence for sufficient BS. I think colleagues did indicate earlier on that the focus will also encompass the ethical and the legal practices of applying the act and whatever. And then you make sure that you are using the latest updated legislation. So in the website, I think this is where you can get that information if there's something that has been updated, and make sure that you use that kind of information as part of your evidence. I'm saying so because PS number C, I think it needs something like the latest updated legislation. So quite often you see that interns are quoting information from maybe 2014, 2016. So that will not really satisfy the requirements. Amended legislation should be new anyway, or recently amended. I think I've just added to that to say, do not give us an evidence under amended legislation and you are quoting something which is 10 years old. And the application therefore must be submitted. Okay. On the issue of evidence, you need to provide evidence and explanation on your current valid indemnity cover. So when it comes to indemnity cover, it must be in your name, and indemnity must also state an intern. We know that maybe while you guys were still students, you had indemnity cover, but the one that is needed in here should state intern, not a student. And you need to refer to the ethical practice guidelines, code of conduct, and ethical rules, because that information is needed to satisfy, I think, BS number E. Again, we want to make it clear to you guys that the SOPs are not cited as legislation. Yeah, under domain number 6, the most common PS that interns take is 6.2. Yes, sometimes they may confuse it with 6.3. We have seen cases where information about 6.2 was put under 6.3. So 6.3, colleagues, remember that it is only relevant to formal education of students, and then the colleagues do not fulfill the criteria. Then back to 6.2. 6.2, it's only having 3 BS, and the common mistake that we pick from new colleagues are the following. In terms of self-assessment, as you can see there, we normally see assessment for the colleagues, while the BS is referring to performing self-assessment and not assessment for the colleagues. This is more common coming from you as interns. So I think we just want to make you aware that BS number B under 6.2 is for you to perform your own self-assessment to identify the learning need or the learning gaps, so that when you get those learning gaps after on assessment, you'll incorporate maybe the reading, so that when you now present the training, you'll be presenting the training for something that you have researched, and the information that you did not know, you will have read about it, and you will have included it into the training. The training plan, the teaching plan also need to be provided. When we are assessing, we are looking at if maybe there is an agreed training plan, teaching plan, with guidance from an experienced colleague, and then that is what you need to be able to show us. And the training plan definitely it is a training plan, nothing else. We have seen scenarios where interns will give us something instead of a training plan. So BS number A need a training plan, which will have been agreed upon between you and them, a colleague. And then the other common mistakes that we see, more specifically for BS number C, interns provide the attendance registers for or to satisfy BS number C. Yes, after conducting the training, of course, you will have an attendance register. You may have evaluations of how the presenter was, whatsoever, but those are not sufficient to meet or to satisfy BS number C. When we say provide, only own learning needs must be submitted, or learning activity as BS number C, we are referring to the quizzes, the role play, maybe the multiple choice question, the true or false question. So BS number C is mainly for you to test if the participants understood what you were training them about, and for you to be able to tell that you may have to do that via administering the quiz, the role play, multiple choice, whatever. So giving the evidence of attendance register and evaluation form to satisfy BS number C won't be sufficient. Okay. We'll move on to the next slide, which is on the way forward towards success. We encourage you once again to read the entire competency standard carefully, so that you will have a clear understanding on what is needed before you could attempt it. Each and every CS is having behavior statements, which my colleagues have been emphasizing that they need to be met. Yes, we need 100%, but there's no harm in trying to meet as much as you can, about 75%, although the requirement is saying for you to be competent, you should have met at least 25%. We also encourage you to consult the training presentations that are available from the council website, I guess. And then we've been conducting this training since March this year. So we encourage you to consult them as a backup information for what you may be reading. And then pay attention to assessor feedback. We try by all means to take our time, read your CPDs, and give comments or feedback, so that when you respond, you will have addressed those comments. In some cases, we see interns not addressing the comments. Maybe what I need to make you aware before I can continue with this slide is that the system has been designed in such a way that those comments that we write, when you resubmit, they'll still be there and we can still read whatever you've submitted. So when we give you comments, please make sure that you attend to them. Thank you. And then for the for the tutors, we encourage you. So we want to colleagues to encourage the interns to meet deadlines. We should be showing you the deadlines remaining for this year shortly. And remember that entry validation needs you to check. And we want you to stay involved from the beginning till the end of the process, and make sure that all phases are completed and entered into the correct place. Make sure that the evidence is valid, professional communication used, and then before resubmitting the assessor's comments, make sure that before they resubmit, the comments of the assessor are attended to. This is to make you aware about I think some of the days have already passed for June. Then we'll focus on the exam date, since now today is on the 30th of July. The exam date is going to be on the 5th and 6th of August, which is Tuesday and Wednesday. It's next week. And for September, you can see the bookings are opening on the 10th of September. On the 24th of September is late. 24th September, late bookings. Or 10 October as well. And then the exam date is going to be on the 21 and 22nd of October. So that is for your information. All exam bookings must be done online before the closing date. And then the late bookings fee will be charged after the closing date. I think the second column should be the closing date, and then the third column is the late bookings, where you'll be charged for that. Thank you. So those are the CPD submission deadlines that we have always been sharing with you. So we are emphasizing, or we want to still show it to you, so that you can see where when are the deadlines and so forth up to the end of the year. We have also included the schedule for January next year. Yeah, that should be January next year, 5 January 26 and 7/26 as well. Yeah, those are the deadlines for you to note. Okay, this concludes the presentation, and we will be going into questions. But be aware that there's a quiz that or a survey that you guys need to complete, which is on this page. So that is what we want you to do as well, while we'll be waiting for your questions, and then we'll take it from there. I think this concludes my presentation. You can go to the next slide just to show them what are the things that how they can contact us. And there's also a WhatsApp line, which is on the next page. Next slide, which they can also take note of. Thank you. Over.
Okay, we have one question from YouTube. If I was unsuccessful with CS 1.6, can I do a completely new CS, like, for example, CS 1.1? If that is possible, should I remove my entry for CS 1.6 that was unsuccessful before submitting the new CS? Or can I just submit my new CS without removing the one that was unsuccessful? I just want to know what are the steps for submitting a new entry that is a completely different CS.
Thank you for the question. I will try and answer. So usually we advise that you work on the submitted one. So if you resubmit, then where you need to select the domain and the competency standard, then you can select. If you had 1.6, then you can select 1.1. You can replace your learning need, your planning, etc. Sometimes interns start with a new one without working on the previous one, the one that was submitted, and then it comes out as a duplicate. So I would advise to go to that one that you have submitted and work on that one and change it then to 1.1. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Noctula. Just to add on what Rianda said, in most cases, we advise interns not to change the competency standards or the competency standards. Instead, we are saying the assessors are the ones who would advise if there is a need. So if the assessors are not, didn't advise that you change your competency standard, we are advising that you keep to that one and address the assessment comments that were given. Thank you.
Is it only the assigned tutor that needs to verify the evidence, or can I ask any available pharmacist to verify the work done?
I'll take the question. It depends on, are they talking about the verification that the tutor has to do on their profile? Because that only the tutor can do, because the intern is linked to the tutor on their profile and they have to verify on the profile. Or are they just talking about verifying, for example, the steps of a compounding process? That can be done by any supervising pharmacist that was in the pharmacy. But if we talk about verification, then your tutor should do that online.
Domain 6.2, what examples of evidence can we provide to show that we did self-reflection?
Okay, let me take this one. For self-evaluation or self-assessment, you can do that by having a checklist, true or false. Like, let's say you are going to be training participants on TB. You will have some questions about the TB, whether you know the cause of the TB, the prevention, the treatment, and then you'll be answering those questions to yourself, checking if you know everything about the TB, which I mean, of course, there are going to be some gaps in there. So the gaps will probably be indicated by maybe no, and then wherever you have knowledge, you'll indicate by yes. So that should be an example of the self-assessment.
Sorry, can I just add that the self-assessment should also focus on your skill that you need to learn. So what regarding provision of training and education did you not know or do you need to learn? So if you need to learn how to compile a training plan, then that should be also be reported in that self-evaluation. So it's not only about the topic, but about the skill that you want to gain. Thank you.
I'm confused about the late bookings. Did they open on the 11th of July and close on the 28th of July?
Okay, Annette, let me take that one. So bookings for the examinations, they closed on the 18th of July. From the 19th of July, late booking started and closed on the 28th of July. So bookings for the exam to be conducted next week are closed at the moment. Thank you.
All right, that's the last question for now. I think we can just wait for some more. We've got one. Can one pay the late booking after the exam, or must it be paid before the exam?
Okay, I can take that. So you can pay for the late booking after booking for the examination. So an invoice will be created and you'll get the opportunity then to pay for it. Thank you.
For CS 1.6, it said that it should be a multidisciplinary team. I'm doing my internship in a community pharmacy that doesn't have a nurse. That's why I wanted to do a new competency standard and not fix this one. So this is a follow-up, I think, on the first question.
Yes, I'll take that one. Then I think it should be advisable because there is no multidisciplinary team within the pharmacy. It's only pharmacy professionals. So I think the intern, I think it might be wise in this case to maybe change it depending on the comments that they received.
For domain 5, besides dispensing Schedule 6, what other examples can you give that might be executed?
Okay, I'll try this one and maybe my colleagues can assist. So ethical and legal practice, your whole profession and what you do and how you, I want to use the word operate in a pharmacy should be based on ethical and legal practice. So it can be someone that asks you for a Schedule 3 pain reliever, and then how can you should you dispense it or not, or a telephonic prescription and what is the rules regarding telephonic prescriptions and or supply of emergency, or in a case of an emergency, for how many days can you supply medicine before you need to receive a prescription. So there's a lot of activities that happen in a pharmacy that can that you can use to practice ethical and legal. But I think most interns select Schedule 6s because there's a Schedule 6 register. But that doesn't mean that all the other actions that you perform doesn't require you to practice or ethical and legal. So yes, I think everyday practice. So any action that you take in the pharmacy that poses a legal issue for you or an ethical issue for you, whether it is providing emergency contraception or patients requesting something that you are not allowed to prescribe or not prescribe dispense, according to your scope of practice, and how you handled that situation can be submitted here. So yes, it's very broad. I don't know if one of the other facilitators want to add something. Thank you.
Yeah, there are other examples like maybe medicine disposal where you'll be applying the X, and there's also a Section 21 procurement, whatever. So there are many examples, although of course interns normally use Schedule 6. Thank you.
This is a follow-up to the question about tutor verification of evidence. The person says, I mean, if my tutor is on sick leave or annual leave, can I ask another pharmacist to sign on each page of the evidence I'll submit?
Yes, you may.
The next question. I am having issues when submitting my resubmissions for my CPDs because the changes I made do not get made when I submit, which leads the assessor to believe that I never made any changes when I did. I've sent an email of this query with the SAPC but received no response as yet.
Hi. You're gonna take it, Evan. It's fine.
Okay, thank you, Neptula. So it's strange that the intern is saying is making changes, but they are not being implemented. Usually when you, after receiving the results and you want to work on the assessor's comment, we recommend that you replace the old entry with the new one, because if you can add on top of it, the old information will remain and might still make the assessor believe that you haven't made any changes. So always replace the old information with the new one, so that the information provided will be in line with the comments from the assessor. The query from, I mean, the fact that the office hasn't responded to the query, we apologize for that. And maybe if you can share your PIN number, we will contact you individually on that one tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, our next one. I would like to know for domain 1.1, what types of evidence would assist me in being competent?
Well, it will depend on the on what your campaign is about. You will need to show the resources that you've used to gather your evidence, or to gather your information. Sorry, not the evidence. Audience or to the public. Then you can also include the poster or the pamphlet or the presentation that you presented to the audience, and then indicate on that where you have addressed A, B, and C, for example. You should also then link that resource that you have used or that you have to find the information and link that to the poster. Then attendance register, photo evidence, surveys that you have circulated afterwards, where you ask the patients if they understood the information, feedback on the way you presented. That's just a few examples. Maybe one of the other facilitators can think of or have thought of a few others that we can include.
Okay, let me add as well. Yes, 1.1 is having 4BS. The evidence that need to be submitted include, because like if you need to show healthy lifestyle and you are conducting a health campaign, let's say on cholera, so somewhere in your evidence, you need to show us maybe in a poster how are you going to be communicating that information of healthy lifestyle, or which information are you going to be communicating to the participants on a healthy lifestyle. And then if you are to do BSB about prevention, again, it need to be clearly stated there as to how did you cover that in terms of prevention. For BS number D, we normally see interns having maybe one patient or two patients, defeating the purpose because campaign is normally in a bigger or gathering. So we always indicated that please do not use the example of one or two, maybe three, but it will always be good if you really do a campaign maybe in a larger gathering because that is what that 1,1 is all about. And in terms of maybe health promotion, which is number one, there are some books that you can be referring to where you can read that talks about health promotion. As much, as long as you can be able to be indicating that information through annotation on how did you achieve that, that should be sufficient. The only challenge is maybe something that we need to emphasize. Interns normally like writing one sentence and just link it to multiple statements, a BS, without really showing how each and every one was indicated. So when you submit this evidence, like in 1,1, show how BSA, B, C, and D were achieved. Thank you.
Okay. Since the last deadline, this is what I get when submitting my CPDs, and I don't know what's the problem because I've tried different locations and gadgets. So they've attached a picture, screenshot of the error that they're getting on our website. Metabang.
Okay, thank you, Noktula. So what I can mention is that we had several disaster recovery testing that were conducted in the office, which were to some extent disturbing the functionality of the system, but that was lasting for a day or two. So I don't think it should have disturbed the intent from submitting because we were trying to make sure that it's planned not on the days of submission, or in cases on the day of submission, we will give, extend the deadline. So my advice will be when interns are experiencing such challenges, they need to submit a query to the office so that we can escalate the matter to the developer to check what is happening. They shouldn't keep it to themselves because sometimes we are under the impression that all is well, whereas they are really experiencing some challenges from their side. So thank you so much. That's all.
Next one. When I did my planning for domain 1, the assessor totally disregarded or misread a very clearly stated point that I obtained my research from interviewing doctors. The assessor noted and asked whether I think that interviewing patients is a credible manner to gather information. How am I supposed to approach this situation?
I am not quite sure. Maybe the intern can just clarify, was it for 1.1 that you wanted to interview patients? Because that I'm not sure how and to which behavioral statement you would want to link interviewing patients. Maybe if he or she can just clarify. I don't know if Adele or Malatetsi maybe understood the question better.
Yeah, Rianda, I agree. I'm not quite sure what the because they talk about interviewing doctors and interviewing patients. So if they can maybe just clarify or give a little bit more information, that will maybe assist us.
While we wait for that response, there's another one. Does today's SMS sent regarding settling of fees refer to this year's fees, the intern annual fees of 711, or even the fees that were owed before when we were still students?
Okay, thank you so much. So, okay, you can come in, Mulado.
Okay, yeah, so the letter, if it's a letter, it states that you need to pay. And when you register as an intern, you would have had to settle your fees for when you were a student. So that would be pertaining to the annual fees for the year that you're registered as an intern.
Okay. For domain 4, are we allowed to utilize the policy of an institution, or are we restricted to use the policies outlined in the tutor manual?
Okay, let me. Normally, I mean, if institution is having a policy, that should be, but normally the policy is developed at a higher level and the SOP at the facility level. But if there is a policy that the hospital has endorsed as a policy, then yes, that should be regarded as a policy. Thank you.
Just wait for more questions. The question that was asked about the interviewing of of patients and doctors, they've come back to say, I interviewed doctors, but the assessor misunderstood it as me interviewing patients as a source of disease pattern research.
Okay, but I'm still not sure how that will be, how that fits to 1.1, unless the intern wanted to show that there is an increase in a specific disease or prevalence in a disease, then it might be useful, but then it will be annotated very clearly or explained clearly why he or she want to interview doctors. So yes, if it's not related to determining the prevalence of a new disease and why you need to do this specific campaign, then I don't know how it is linked to 1.1. Thank you.
And followed up to say, on which I based my public health outreach. Thus, my credibility of information sourcing was found not scientific based on this misunderstanding.
Okay, then maybe I think the intern should then just describe it better and more clear in the planning as to why the doctors, because they see, and I can't see that it would be such a big issue if you say but then it depends on how many doctors you interviewed. If it was only one, then it's the opinion of one doctor. But if there's a team of 10 doctors in your institution and you spoke to all 10 of them, individually and all 10 of them indicated the same issue, then I can say, okay, for that institution, this can be an issue that needs to be addressed. So I think it's about the wording and how it is presented in the planning and then also in the implementation. And then we will need to see those interviews. If it was a survey or a questionnaire that the doctors filled in, we will need to see that in the evidence as well to know that it actually happened, and that the conclusion that was drawn from that is actually accurate. That's how I would do it, and how I would expect, or what I would expect to see. Thank you.
Maybe Tabang, if I can add to that, in this instance, do you maybe think it might be advisable for the intern to send a request to council to just get in contact with the assessor to just to clarify this misunderstanding, if it was in fact a misunderstanding, or if they may be just not understanding the comment correctly? That might also be an option to get the specific issue resolved.
Okay, thank you, Adele. So from the office, we do evaluate the requests because there is a criteria for interns to have a consultation with the assessor. So like we're saying, the intern should have attempted a particular entry on 2 occasions and be unsuccessful. So if it was a first attempt, we don't usually consider a request for a consultation meeting, but the intern, we're expecting them to work with their tutors to address all the assessors' comments, and then in case they still couldn't get it right, is then that we can arrange for consultation if they make such a request.
Okay, thank you, Tabang. Then maybe the intern should, maybe as Rianda stated, just clarify clearly what was done and how it relates to the identification of the need for the campaign and how everything fits into one another, and then maybe that will address the confusion.
An intern would like clarity on the fee, the booking fee. The question is, can I pay the late booking fee after writing the exam, or is it compulsory to pay the fee before the exam?
I can take
Okay.
that. Yeah, all right. Yeah, okay. So you can pay the late booking fee after writing the exam, but if you are able to pay it before writing the exam, better pay it and not put it off. Thank you.
There are seemingly no further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Noktula. So this brings us to the end of our workshop, and I just want to take this opportunity to thank all interns and tutors who managed to attend this workshop. Thank you so much, and we wish the interns all the best with the coming exam and the outstanding portfolio of evidence entries that they still need to submit. We believe the experience that the assessors and moderators shared with you today will come in handy, and you will be able to get everything right with your next submissions. And I also want to thank our assessors and moderators for making time to come and make interns aware of some of the errors they are picking as they do in the assessment and moderation. I believe that will assist interns, and thank you so much for really taking your time to make sure that you help these interns as they need help always. And lastly, I just want to thank the team from the office for all the preparations. We really appreciate it and all the support. And from myself, I just want to wish you all a good evening and good night.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.